Today, we're going to close the day, or this part of the day, with a conversation around how policy initiatives that are being put into place in CS are actually being implemented on a state level. How is that actually happening? What are the biggest challenges? What are the amazing successes that are occurring? And we have two sort of joint panelists that are going to be in discussion. I'm going to just give you their names and their organizations. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves and then each take a few minutes to kind of talk about the question at hand. And then we'll open it for Q&A. The first panelist is Devin Holmes, who is with Big Sky Code Academy. And the other one is Julie Jordan, who's at Mississippi State University. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
So I am a director at a research center at Mississippi State University called the Research and Curriculum Unit, which probably doesn't mean much, but we are a group at Mississippi State that for over 50 years has partnered with the Department of Education. So we sort of see ourselves sort of as the think tank. We do the curriculum work, we do assessment work. We started off all in CTE, but we do other things now, other areas of the Department of Education. And so we are sort of the implementer. Mike Mulvihill, which some of you, Mike's in the audience, he's our Department of Ed person that we work really closely with, but it's my team that oftentimes takes sort of the policy and the once curricula are approved, then our role is to train the teachers or retool the teachers or whatever it may be, because in CTE, that rolls over regularly. So we're about every 3 years we're updating and revising and retooling teachers as the curricula change in CTE. So the computer science work is rolled into our office. So last summer, I think, we began a pilot project. We pilot things so that we can have lots of freedom around what we're doing before they actually become policy or approved curricula. So we're piloting the computer science piece, and we started with the ECS program in 9th grade. And then we are doing a 2-day training program for elementary teachers. So districts opted in. So it was one of those opt-in kinds of pilots. We were hoping we would get 12 schools. In Mississippi, we have 144 school districts. We were hoping we'd get 12 because that's sort of the magic number we needed for ECS to be able to kind of come in and have a group that was big enough. We got 35 districts that wanted to do it. So we ended up with about 55 teachers being trained last year with ECS. And then around 150 or so teachers, 160 teachers that were elementary, because the district that opted in had to agree to have a high school teacher trained and then agreed to have at least one elementary teacher trained. So they had to do something in the K-5 arena and they had to do something at the high school level. And then because our plan was we would start there and then we would then roll up adding courses in high school after that in the pathway, and then we'd build to the middle of the middle school piece and roll out our older, or what we consider our older ICT curricula in the middle school. So I would say, we started the training, it was a week long, and the elementary piece was 2 days because we took the code.org piece and then we added to that, because our existing state frameworks around what to do with digital literacy or computer literacy in the school system, we added some other pieces around it because we knew that as we moved the middle school piece out, we were going to roll downhill keyboarding, which was kind of officially in this middle school piece. So we did some extra things with the elementary teachers in addition to code.org that we wanted them to implement. The elementary teachers had to agree, the elementary schools had to agree to do about 40 hours of embedded coding activities or related digital literacy activities during the course of the year. So that was the district's agreement. How that has gone is we put 2 people. Really, we thought it was going to take 1 person. We ended up having to have an extra person at our group to kind of follow along this, because our people, my implementation team of 2, actually last year visited every school to talk to the teachers to see how it was going. And I think from an implementation point on the ground, that was perhaps the best thing we've done, is to have that person go visit those teachers, observe what they were doing and see firsthand who's doing what well and who's not necessarily doing it well, and then try to figure out why some are not doing it and some are doing it better, and what is it that we need to change on our end from a support perspective to make everything better as it rolls out into the classrooms. A couple things that we learned was that teachers have a hard time giving up knowing everything in the classroom. And when you ask them what they need, they always want to come back, well, I need to know how to program. I need to know more coding. And the reality of it is, no, you may or may not need to know more coding. You may just need to get comfortable with the fact that your kids are going to outcode you. And let it go right now and kind of learn as you go too. But that was the piece. So we're trying to figure out now what to do about the teachers who do think they want to learn more coding, and how do we build that sort of skill competency in them so that they're more comfortable with it. I think I heard somebody this morning say something about it's important that they feel confident and competent. And I thought that was a really good comment that I actually wrote down, because I think that's important for teachers. But I think the key, and I'm going to let Devin talk about this first, or follow up on our first year, is having somebody that went out in the field and touched every one of those teachers during the year. We're going to try to do that again this year as we bring in new teachers for this summer. Obviously, that can't continue, but once I think we get a good feel, maybe after 2 or 3 years, we can back off and just visit part of the time. The other piece of it, my team, because of our other work in career and technical education, we also train all the other new CTE teachers. So whether you're in health sciences or you're in welding or in carpentry or you're in automotive, we are already going out into the field and touching those teachers. So once we get kind of CS over the hump, then we consolidate. Julie may go to this school, and I may visit the new welding teacher and the new health sciences teacher, and now I'll go visit the new CS teacher, and just look to make sure what they need, so that we're touching all those new teachers as they begin to learn to be a teacher. In one area it's content, and the other area they're learning to be a teacher because they already know their content. So I think that's sort of the first year of what's happening on the ground in Mississippi, and I'll let Devin talk, and we can kind of go from there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Devin from the Big Sky Code Academy. I'm based out of Missoula, Montana, Big Sky country. And for those that don't know some of the stats about Montana, we're the 4th largest state in the union, but we're 48th in population density. So we think a lot about the rural challenges of CS policy, the implementation of that policy, how do we roll it out. We have 3 main initiatives at the Academy. We run an adult coding boot camp for 18 plus. It's our workforce development. It's got some ties into CTE, and I'll sort of talk about that. We also run an after-school coding program currently for middle and high school girls called Montana Code Girls, but we're expanding that to boys and girls to become Montana Code Kids, to provide those opportunities for kids to learn computer science, coding, have exposure to that. And then we're the Code.org regional partner for Montana. So we do K-12 professional development in bringing the Code.org curriculum into our public schools in Montana. Up through 2015, we had a grand total of 0 students take the AP Computer Science A exam in Montana. So my numbers are always going to look good because I started from nothing. And we're really excited about the new CS Principles Advanced Placement exam. You know, the challenge that we have really tried to tackle in this last year, and we talked to some of our neighboring states that have some of these challenges. One, from a policy perspective, computer science in Montana cannot be used to replace math or science. We don't have a CS endorsement for our teachers. It's coding, computer science is taught by business teachers. We're not actually moving that policy along fast enough. You know, there's conversations about it, but it just hasn't really occurred at the pace that we'd like to see it. And part of the concern from our perspective is that we're a state with a legislature that only meets every 2 years. So they just finished up their last session, so we have to wait till 2019 till they come back to sort of readdress this at the legislature level. We do have a Board of Education that we can drive, in between those sessions. But if we really want state legislature and policy initiatives to be addressed, we pretty much get that shot, every 2 years, which is a fascinating challenge in a sector that is moving way faster than that. We also, we're traditionally a natural resource extraction state and tourism, and so making this transition as an economy to a 21st century based economy and talking about how technology fits into our traditional industries has, it's a learning curve when we think about coal mining and timber and ranching and farming. We talk to K-12, CTE, community colleges. They're still very much focused on those hands-on trades type of skills, and we have to educate them on the fact that there is a lot of tech in ranching, and coding skills are very important to, at the very least, understanding that. So we definitely try and span the spectrum of addressing the issues of access to computer science education, developing skills in a traditional K-12 and then higher ed environment, but also in the what I call the vocational approach to coding, which is our 12-week boot camp, where 18-year-olds can come straight out of high school. 30% of them are not going on to 2 or 4 year, and we want those counselors to be talking to them about, hey, you could go do a 12-week coding boot camp and enter the workforce in computer science and coding skills and high tech after 12 weeks as a junior developer and actually have a career path there, as opposed to the normal counseling, which is pretty much the trades when you come out that. So we've got a relatively large boulder and a pretty steep hill, and we're pushing pretty hard to try and get up that hill. We'll chat a little more about it, but love to also get questions from the audience on this.
I would say that and I think everybody in here is dealing with the rural issue. I mean, our populated states have rural pockets and how to reach those, and we sit around just banging our heads of how do we deal with the rural issue and do it sustainably. You can imagine, I mean, you got the same things as, okay, we go train a teacher in Shaw, Mississippi, a little bitty place, and but as soon as we give them new skills, then they can go to the district down the highway that's going to give them a larger supplement in pay, and they're not going to stay in that little bitty district. So it's this constant piece of trying to figure out about rural, and I think better using technology. Some of the curricula that are out there that we can use that do APCS sort of prep, ECS or other ones that are out there that are approved. Some of them are more suited to doing online type coursework, and we're trying to figure out how to do online computer science, because we know that to reach our goal of having an APCS type course in every high school in Mississippi, that we will have to do some of it online. That it's just that we don't foresee getting to that goal, and with having a teacher in every building, it just doesn't seem to be sustainable. And then we're going to have that huge equity and access issue, which is big enough right now in Mississippi and to deal with in our small rural communities, and we just don't need this to be another big notch out of our trying to deal with equity and access. So we spend an awful lot of time talking about it. I don't know that we have any answers for that. Our hope, I think, is that we need curriculum developers to help us out with this and create curricula that are more suitable for online delivery, or a mixed blended online delivery, or whatever it may be. We've got to do some things. We were talking earlier, I think, about sharing teachers. We're going to have to help superintendents understand how to share a teacher, get a CS teacher trained, and let them roam around. School districts are sort of used to sharing teachers within a building. They'll have a teacher that might teach AP over at this high school, and then maybe they go over there because they move back and forth teachers within districts. But to have teachers shared across districts is something that we don't see very much, and we're going to have to do that, I think, to be able to meet this need. So there's some ideas about how to do this, but right now, obviously, the low-hanging fruit is to get those teachers, get those districts, and get those schools some training that want training and are asking for it. And that's where we started. And as we continue to figure out, we can't make it policy that a CS course or ECS or whatever it may be we have a technology credit that's required for graduation. So our objective would be to get to the point and have capacity where the Department of Ed can say, now, beginning in 2021, the course that's required is now a computer science class. Now that's the goal, is so that every student in Mississippi at some point, the course for graduation is a coding course, a CS course. But we have to show to our legislatures that we can build that capacity to be able to actually create that opportunity for every high school to make that available. So I think that, so on the ground, that's just some of the goals when you sort of backtrack how to get there are, and you guys are probably better at online, so I'd lately we were chatting earlier about some of the things that you're trying to do with online.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this idea of sharing teachers, where, so again, we're a nonprofit, and so we work next to the educational system, but we're not in the system per se. And we've actually taken to the Montana Digital Academy, which is our online high school, the idea of utilizing one of our instructors to deliver the AP CSP curriculum, given that they're not funded to do it. Their budget's going to get slashed 36 to 56% this year. We're not sure yet. So they're not taking on new courses. And and we recognize this just because we also are a coding boot camp, so we have these challenges with the university system. They look at us and they go, well, but you're not really a school in that you're not accredited, you're not part of the K-12, but we do have capacity as a nonprofit. And so we've tried to be innovative and find ways. We have not been successful at that conversation yet, but I will continue to push it. The online component, and what we've found is with our youth program and now with our adult boot camp, which we're going to take the experiments we've done there and the best practices and bring it into our K-12 PD, is we have developed our own learning management system and incorporated the ability to do synchronous training, real time for whatever we're teaching. And so for example, in our adult boot camp, 3 times a week we have 5 students who log in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night with 2 instructors, and we teach them full stack JavaScript. In our youth program, and that's because we have students in a town that is not anywhere close to where our instructors are and is not big enough for us to ever justify deploying an instructor there, because there's only ever going to be 2 students, and so the numbers don't work. Same with on our youth program. When we piloted Montana Code Girls last year, we had one girl from a town called Malta, it's up on the High Line, which is up by Canada, who really wanted to learn how to code. And there's like 7 people in Malta. It's probably like 2,000, but it's super small. And we had to sort of figure it out. And so we found someone who was willing to teach the curriculum online. And again, it's in that synchronous model where we log in, we screen share, we leverage the LMS, and we really deliver that curriculum to those individuals. Now, it's worked very well in small classes. So it's great when you have 1, 2, 3, 5 people. How do we operate that at scale becomes a really interesting challenge for us. How do we offset the fact that you don't actually have that in-classroom environment where you have the interaction and there's a lot of advantages to being in the same room? That's great, but when I think of one of our teachers that we're sending to training this summer is from a town called Turner, Montana, which is, I think, about 25 miles from the Canadian border, and the entire K-12 school in Turner has 10 teachers and 70 students. Like, that's the reality of it. We've got 72 one-room schoolhouses in Montana. If we don't figure out how to deliver over the internet to those individuals, we're never actually going to truly get 100% engagement. And also in those one-room schoolhouses or in a place like Turner, the next town down the road might not have someone with the skills to teach CS. And so that other district is going to have to figure out how to share that teacher, or that teacher is going to have to teach in some form of an online environment. And so we started it in the youth, we've moved it to our adult boot camp, and now we're coming back to the middle with our K-12. That being said, from a policy perspective, when we sort of talk about this and talk to the governor's office and the Department of Education or the Board of Education, hey, online teacher PD, online training, you know, get a lot of sort of head scratching going, that doesn't fit the model because you're not in a high school. I'm like, true, but I'm also in 2017, and there's a lot of us who are not in our office, and we work remotely. And so the reality is, from a workforce perspective, we're doing this anyways, so let's figure out how do we devise policy that allows us to offer credit, do it where teachers aren't attached to a physical school, they're just a licensed teacher, and they can deliver it. Those are some of the real questions that we push towards, you know, from the policy perspective, we push up and ask and sort of push it and say, hey, we're going to do it because we're not regulated by the government. We're a nonprofit, so we just do it. But at the same time, we also recognize that the sustaining force behind this is to get it into the system. And I really think of ourselves in many ways as the R&D lab, where we're just going to pilot it and make a bunch of mistakes and, you know, figure it out over 2 or 3 years. And when the legislature comes back in 2019, we'll have some great outcomes and say, this is what we learned and this is the thing we want you to pass. And I'm going to work with Sean on this and, like, this is what we want. And so you pass it and we'll just sort of hand it over and we'll move on to the next challenge. But yeah, it's just interesting because we're really sort of pushing against some of the traditional systems on how we do PD and how we deliver curriculum at the K-12 level, much less at the higher ed level, where we compete on the coding bootcamp stuff.
I would add back to the access. I've heard conversations around one of the things that we learned when we started this project was listening to our colleges and our universities around what courses CS would end up being like, and we got feedback that said, please don't teach CS in lieu of a math or science class. So we are taking the stance that is not what we're going to do at all, that CS will become somehow eventually a required course, and it will not take the place of a math or a science class in Mississippi. So we think it'll take the place of this technology credit, so we think we can do it without adding another credit to the list. But we found that to be really important, and I honestly think that if we can't get to the point where it becomes a requirement, then the small schools that we already have equity and access issues in will never teach it, and thus it has to become a requirement. Because the larger schools with wealthier communities will teach it anyway, and already are and have been. They're the first to get robotics for their kids, and they're the first to do all these other things for their kids. It will have to become a requirement, and at some point, we'll have those early adopters. That's what we're getting now. We'll opt in, we'll get those early adopters, then we'll have to kind of lay it on top of that middle group, and then the 20% won't do it until we require it. And that's the group that we've got to get sort of, I think, really prepared for. The quality of what then gets delivered, it becomes an issue at that point.
The other thing I would, the other perspective I would add on the policy side, that I suspect holds true in many places, but definitely in rural communities, is that education policy it's not the only lever. You've got to combine a bunch of stuff. Because the concern, I brought this up this morning at the first panel, when I talk at the local level, and I talk to mayors or chambers of commerce or even as parents, everyone recognizes the value of computer science, and yes, our kids need to learn it. That's awesome. But I'm worried. I'm worried that they're going to learn this skill, they're going to want to study this, which is a great thing, but I'm worried they're going to leave. And when 20 high school kids leave a town of 300, that's a really big deal, because those 20 high school kids were fifth-generation ranchers, and who's going to run the ranch? And so the point I push back at the local and then at the state level is to say, we need to push education policy, but we also need to push economic development policy. And what are the economic triggers that will allow someone to stay in that community and start a business? So what are the incentives that you can give that align with learning the skills, so we can create the incentive of, hey, if you do this and you do that and you get the certificate and you go to college, then you can come back to this town, and we have a tax incentive. We have an innovation program with a $1,000 grant from the local chamber to help you start that business, to bring that talent back into the community. Those issues, you don't really see them in San Francisco. I mean, I lived here for a long time, and it's like, oh, well, you lose 50 kids, you got 500 more moving in. I mean, it's just bigger, right? But when your numbers are so small that, 5 kids could be 1%, 2%, 5% of your workforce, that's a really big issue. And so, we don't think about policy just from the education policy perspective. We talk about it in that you have to combine also the levers on the economic side for it to truly work and retain the workforce that you want to have those skills in that community. And the other thing that, I sort of the analogy I use, and I caveat this with I hate sports analogies because everyone uses them, they're cliche, but the reality is from a workforce development and employer perspective, what I say employers is that, the NFL and the NBA is tracking kids when they're 10 years old. And they're tracking them all the way through. And yet you're not doing that from an academic perspective. If you're an employer that needs high-tech skills, you're not actually engaging in grade 6, 7, and 8 to look for students that are already demonstrating an aptitude for those skills that you need and somehow supporting it through scholarship programs or funding after school programs. And yet it seems, our social narrative is that the norm is okay for us to do that with athletics, but not with academics. And I think that's true in any community. And I look at that and go, that's broken, that model, right? We need to, as businesses, think about how do we support the 10-year-old, because in 10 years, that 10-year-old is going to be in the workforce, and I need them to be in a certain place. Yes, I have to solve my problem today, but I need to solve my problem in 10 years. And so, and part of this is forecasting. I get it's difficult, and there's logistics around it, but it's really just about a culture and how we think about it. That's something that I've been really pushing employers to really think long and hard about is, by the time they're 18 or 22, like you've lost that game. You need to start at 10 and thinking about those 10-year-olds now with, site visits, and in high school, a summer internship, and engage them and build that affinity for the skill set and the company to bring them in. And so there's, again, it's a very complex jigsaw puzzle, but in some of these small towns, this is the way that we reverse that tide of the workforce leaving for the big city, which in our case, big cities is anything over 10,000 people. But it's, that there is that talent that's just leaving those small communities, and that's killing those small communities from us.
Hello? We're going to open it up for questions. Just make sure you have the mic so that it catch you on video.
Hi, Julie, I'm struck by something you said at the very beginning about teachers not wanting to be the only ones knowing everything in the classroom. And I found that really interesting. And I'm curious, thinking about computer science and STEM in general being such an important part of learning STEM and computer science is being able to experiment and fail and learn from those opportunities. How y'all help your teachers learn how to model that kind of behavior of failure and experimentation?
Yeah, so I think it's something that we're trying now to to be more intentional about talking about in the training, so that they. One of the other things, has anybody else done ECS? Is anybody else doing ECS? So ECS, one of the other things we learned last year about ECS was that, and our teachers learned about about CS in general, as we've had that conversation, it's not just coding. And so people come to training to learn to be a CS teacher, and they think they're going to learn to code. And so after about 2 days, they're like, wait a minute, we're not learning any coding. I need to learn coding if I'm going to teach CS. So it first is trying to get them over that mentality of that, and then helping them, trying to just say, look, you just got to have to relax a little bit. There'll be some follow-up training. The process works. It's one of those, trust the process. And of course, the first year we're doing that, they're trusting Gail from California to tell us in Mississippi, how to do something, which is a barrier to get over in the first place. And then, but this coming up year, the model is going to be really interesting to learn, because now we've got teachers that have done it for a year who will be in the classroom with the new teachers. And so we expect to see a totally different type of environment this summer than we saw last summer. And then we get those train the trainer things beginning to happen, and that's when we can get it to scale. So it's getting over those first 2 or 3 years without everybody getting so frustrated with it and helping them try to relax. They call Shelley all the time. I mean, we've got a person. I mean, Shelley is our person, and now we have Sandra. But those teachers, those first, particularly the ECS teachers, not so much the elementary teachers, but particularly the ECS teachers, those 50 of them, I don't know how many times they've called her and asked about how to do something. And they've created these. So then once a month, they do an after-school webinar where they can just make it available. They can get online and they can talk about whatever the unit was for the year. What issues are they having with the unit? And so there are regular webinars on that they can participate in or not participate in. But if you need help, get online and we'll help talk through it. And that way, one teacher can tell the other teacher, "Here's what I did. Here's how I got through it." So I think that it's you do it. You just have to talk about the fact that you're not used to it. And I think helping teachers talk about the fact that it's okay. I started teaching, I shouldn't tell, in 1988 at a Mississippi School for Math and Science. It's a residential school for gifted kids. I started teaching coding, programming, literally. The class was Fortran and Pascal at the time. And you can imagine the best and the brightest were at this school. And after the first week, I'm going, I don't know, y'all figure it out. So, I mean, I learned early on in 1988, 1990, teaching kids about coding, that once you turn them loose, they were going to go so much faster than you ever had time to keep up with. And so I think this first group can tell the next group of teachers that this is okay, and here's how we can deal with it together and sort of move beyond. Because if they've been a history teacher, or they've been an ELA teacher, or they've been a math teacher, and they're teaching pre-calculus, they were the only one in the room that knew everything. I mean, it was totally new content for kids, and this is opposite that. These kids know more than they do when they walk in the door. Many of them do know more than they do when they walk in the door. So it's a mindset change for the teachers.
We've seen some great success at all levels with the teachers with our unplugged activities. So there's especially if you don't have a technical background, a lot of apprehension. We had a class of 24 K-5 teachers, music, art. They didn't come from that tech, and we did a bunch of unplugged activities with decks of cards and jigsaw puzzles that teach the concepts of sorting algorithms and computational thinking. But you remove a little bit of the apprehension, and you can start to teach about, how to improve, constant iteration. And we do that in our youth program and adult as well. Those activities really have helped a lot to get them over that barrier of feeling uncomfortable and being okay with that before you say, all right, let's get on the computer, which raises that level just much higher. And so we're big fans of teaching coding without computers. It's like, let's do a deck of cards. And we've seen a lot of success with that.
Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Brett Tanaka. I'm from the Hawaii Department of Education. Given your experience with this startup process, I'm just curious, you mentioned that you started out with coding and it was a new experience for teachers. Considering like if you have like another area of computer science, let's just say networking or something a little more advanced, would you say that it would help your teachers, having gone through that experience, to expand into another level or area of computer science?
That's a really good question. I haven't thought about. I mean, we teach networking in our CTE programs, so I haven't thought about that. And some of our high schools actually have. Well, I shouldn't say. We actually pulled the data. I don't know if Mike even knows this. We pulled the data to see how, because we have course codes in our database system, our student level. In Mississippi, we have a system that covers all the kids, all the data feeds into. And so we went to look to see, we have courses for Pascal and Fortran. We have all these course codes for these courses. We went actually look to see how many students were actually enrolled in those, quote, true programming language courses that were been on the books forever. And we didn't find any except at the Math and Science School that were actually being used. So although we had programming language courses in the books, over the years nobody was teaching them anymore. So but I haven't thought about letting teachers sort of interact with the sort of the CTE side of the networking classes that we have. That might be a really good idea, maybe just at least sharing experiences of how when they learn that. But the networking, the IT folks that are teaching the networking classes usually came from industry and had the content knowledge and then had to learn to be a teacher. But they might be really helpful mentors, and that's a really good idea. One of the things we talked about is rolling uphill from the high school. Now that we've got kids that have ECS, we visited, one of the things that they did, I told you about Shelley going and visiting all the schools, and she was in this one particular school on the Gulf Coast, and she was in the classroom, and she told, the teacher explained why she was there, and the kids were, she was just watching her teach. And when Shelley finished, or the class ended, the kids came up and said, "Can we talk to you?" And so the kids wanted to talk to this person who they saw as being from the Department of Education or Mississippi, this other person from the outside. And so there were about 7 or 8 kids that talked to Shelley and said, "Now we've learned this, what's next?" I mean, they hadn't been taking that class for 2 months, and they were already figuring out, okay, I like this, what's the next course I'm going to take? And so Shelley comes back trying to say, okay, Julie, what are we going to do next for these kids? And because now that we've turned some of these kids on, what's the next course? They want to know what's next. And so that's another thing we learned this year is we better know what's next pretty quick, because these kids are going to go, they're going to eat it up, and they're going to be rocking and rolling. And we're trying to figure out what's next. We have some ideas, but we're trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah, we totally have that problem. We just finished our first full year of our after-school program, and we've seen a repeat, students from the first semester repeat into the second, and now we're going, if they come back in September, we better have a new curriculum for them. We can't do the same thing. From the teacher perspective, it's actually a really interesting idea. Our only engagement has been to recruit teachers that have gone through the PD into actually teaching our summer camps for youth, because we know they know how to run a classroom because they're a teacher, and it gives us the opportunity to introduce them to other curriculum that's not the code.org curriculum that they were trained in. So we're giving them exposure and variety of curriculum by having them, saying, hey, if you want to teach during the summer, we're teaching summer camps, and we'll give you priority on the hiring because you were in our teacher program, so we want you in our summer camp program. So we're trying to do that. We actually do have one teacher that last week applied for our full stack JavaScript boot camp, because she's like, this is awesome, and I just want to learn how to code so I can just be a better developer. So she's actually going to run through our boot camp in addition to our teacher PD. So that's sort of how we're expanding the exposure to other opportunities there.
I'll share an idea that one of the things that we're trying to figure out how to do is for what's next. So if the ECS course in the high school is a required course, you got to have a little more structure over the way we're sort of top down. Here's what we need to teach. You're going to get credit. It's going to count towards your graduation. Okay. Beyond that, high schools, we have a little more flexibility as far as electives go. And so this would clearly become an elective course. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is turning to the MOOC space and to the sort of the online courseware space that's out there. And our office go through and vet some of those programs, vet some of those courses that are sort of all, self-paced, whenever kids sign up free or whatever, and vet some of those and say, okay, here's some modules. So here's a set of courses. They can be either full-length courses or modules, and say, if you go, what we're trying to figure out how to do within is document completion so they can earn a credit, but just turn them loose and say, here's some things that we vetted. If you go take this, and this, we'll give you a Carnegie unit and demonstrate completion. And we'll call it some course. And because you can make up, the districts can have what they call district level, or what do they call them, like district option courses. And they can get a local credit for it that just applies to an elective as far as graduation goes. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that and just say, you want to go take Java, you want to go do CSS, you want to do HTML, whatever turns you on after you've done your required course, here, go to pull from a menu, and we'll give you a Carnegie unit for that if we can vet that as being a quality course.
Hi, I'm Leanne DeLizer. I'm from CSNYC and CS for All, and I know both of you are engaged with the consortium in meaningful ways. I'm wondering, I'm a big fan of borrowing things from CTE where they have some really great best practices. And one of the things we see in New York State, I'm not familiar with your own CTE requirements, is that our CTE schools can offer dual credit courses. So like a school focused on aeronautics could do an aeronautics and math course, and they get both their math credit and an aeronautics credit, right? And so it's this really beautiful blended curriculum. And I'm wondering if there's a way for some of those smaller schools, those one-room schoolhouses, where we can find really interesting, you could imagine a writing course where the media in which they publish is the web. And so they get some web design and writing or ELA credit at the same time because of the common goals. And if curriculum development like that would be useful in those rural areas where they don't have a lot of freedom of teacher hours, right? So I'm just thoughtful as whether that could be useful in those situations.
Yeah, look, it's a very interesting idea. When you first said dual credit, my mind immediately went to high school, college. And since I was there, we actually have, and she's not in the audience, but we have a high school teacher from Montana who's here who teaches a dual credit course and where they get credit at Montana State University. And we were talking at lunch, and he said the really interesting thing, out of 25 students, only 5 are taking advantage of that, right? And so to me, that was a huge issue of, why would the other 20 not do it? Because there's no extra work. You just have to pay the $147, right? But it's still only like $140, and so but for some people, and Montana is very price sensitive, so I get that. But I do think that's really interesting, and what we've found is that we've had to be very creative around our PD, especially with working with Code.org, and we love the partnership, and they're awesome, but the model was originally built around, recruit a high school teacher, recruit a middle school teacher. I'm like, great, I've got someone who teaches K-9. Where do they fall? And so we've been creative in recruiting at that level, and what we've done is we recruit at the highest level because we make the assumption that they can teach down the curriculum as opposed to the other direction. And I think in that one-room schoolhouse situation, one is, does the person have the skills, much less the bandwidth and the time? And if yes, where do we plug them in? But then how do we start doing the online? We're totally just going to do it online, right? And we're going to morph the model, and we're going to ask forgiveness and exceptions from all of our partners, but say, look, if I can get 5 one-room schoolhouses next year teaching computer science discoveries, fundamentals, principles, I don't care. That's a huge win for me because it's a pilot. I love pilots too as well because it's a pilot project, so it's not official. It's just a pilot. And how do we combo it, right? I think of that also, by the way, at the university level, where when I look at, for example, our School of Journalism at University of Montana, which does not have technology as part of their core curriculum, which kills me. But I think, wow, why can't you have, a class in the School of Journalism that's about publishing an online publication in WordPress, and you get a couple credits over at CS, and then you get a CS minor with your major in journalism. I'm totally with you on that one. We have found at the higher ed level, especially, the system isn't designed to be that flexible. Though people are open to the idea. The other thing, I don't know if you have this, but we have, and to me it was a unique concept, we have curriculum co-ops in Montana, which was a whole brand new world to me because it wasn't a district, it was a co-op of a bunch of stuff. And so it's like another layer, we talk to the district and the principal, but then we talk to the co-op as well about our curriculum. And so that's just been an interesting engagement on how to push policy and initiatives through the co-op consortium piece versus actually attacking at the district level.
No, we're top down as far as curriculum goes, so there's no middle layer of co-op in there to have to deal with. But that's an interesting idea. We do this in CTE. So if you're in the engineering pathway in CTE, you can take engineering and you can check off. It can be, it can count for one of your upper level math elect courses that you have to have. You don't really get 2 Carnegie units, but you can check that box that you've met that math credit for graduation. So we do that in CTE. I'll have to, I'll think about it from a computer science, because if we want computer science to sort of become that 5th discipline, then if we start checking other boxes off, they may argue that it's not a 5th discipline, that it's just another form of math. So that's really interesting. I have to think about that. But maybe for upper level, I just, have to think about it. Maybe something beyond that. It's what I call that space course that that I think, sort of becomes everybody has to have type thing. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
ELA. Yeah, no, we haven't gotten anybody to give us an ELA credit yet. We have this commission that allows us to do that or not do that from the CTE perspective. And the dual credit piece into the universities, having working at Mississippi State University, our colleges are not very eager to offer dual credit at the CS level or anything, engineering or anything. Some of they wrap that around their accreditation issues, their own SACS accreditation or their own ABET accreditation issues. I think a lot of it is just perception that there's no way that a high school teacher could teach this course as effectively as that college teacher can. So it's a little bit of both.
And we see that with prior learning assessments too. And where they want us to lock in the curriculum, or they go, oh, well, your boot camp instructor is not a licensed teacher. And like, our curriculum is changing all the time because the industry is changing all the time, but we want to have an 18-year-old do a boot camp and get 3 or 6 credits so they can go get the certificate, and that conversation has been, a very steep slope.
Now let me tell you, I don't know about in Montana, but if there is a nonprofit in Mississippi who wants to bring teachers to the table, we will figure out how to get them approved to teach. We will figure that out. We will figure that. Bring them down to Mississippi. We'll get them figured. We'll get them.
So we have about 4 more minutes. So one other question, and if not, maybe parting thoughts from each of you, sort of on the summaries. Unless anybody else? Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. When it comes to on-the-ground implementation, I would just reiterate the best thing I think we did, and we're going to figure out how to put the manpower into it this year, is get somebody out into the schools during the school year, touching those teachers. That's the kind of support that we think had mattered this year. We're going to have very few people drop out and not want to do it again next year. I think actually everybody, unless they're leaving teaching or they're doing something or they're changing schools. But I think that was one of the things that took an awful lot of time, but was well worth it. So I think from an on-the-ground implementation piece, somehow creating that support structure for those teachers the first couple of years that are learning to do this new thing, I think is really, really important.
I would say that creativity in implementation is probably the key. Recognizing we all work for different entities and work within different systems, but being creative about how you do things and finding a partner. If you can't do it within your system, whether it's a university or a K-12 or government, finding a partner, there's guaranteed there's going to be someone out there who will partner with you, whether it's through the chamber or business or nonprofit. Just be super creative about that, because this industry is moving fast. It's changing all the time. And depending on the speed of your state or district from a policy perspective, you might find yourself behind the 8 ball. And in states like Montana, where we really are trying to build a 21st century economy, we got to barrel ahead, and we have to be super creative about how we do it. And so, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Like, to me, I see a barrier. I'm like, how do I get around that and over that and all that? And we just find creative solutions, even though sometimes they don't fall within the guidelines. And then we put the label on it that it's a pilot project. And that lets you get away with a lot of stuff. I know it sounds silly, but if you say, let's just pilot this for a year or two, people will kind of get on board because it seems there's less of a commitment and there's less of a risk if it fails that, oh, well, it was just a pilot and didn't work. And so I definitely am always talking about, let's do a pilot on that kind of stuff.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give him a hand of applause. Thank you for being brave, having the 2 spotlights on you. Thank you so much.